All right, so last year and the year before, I had the privilege of working at College Heights Christian Church in their MOPS program, which many of you know stands for Mothers of Preschool. I was kind of coerced into doing this by one of my friend's sisters who said, you know, girls really like it if you're good with kids. I was also led to believe that there was a shortage of males, which implied there would be a surplus of females. So I was like, all right, this seems like a good idea, and I needed Christian service. So everything was in place for me to do Mothers of Preschoolers, and I did. And I remember that first day, I walked in and they have this big play area set up where the kids come while all the moms are getting ready, and we just played and we would wrestle, and it was really fun. I have 9 nieces and nephews, so it was really fun just to wrestle with these kids and play with them. And then we went into our little lesson area. The leader person stuck me with 2- and 3-year-olds because she didn't want to put me anywhere near diapers because I said that would be a really bad idea. And so she stuck me with the 2- and 3-year-olds with the other female volunteer. And one of the kids brought in a bunch of little Hot Wheels race cars. And I thought it would be a great idea to play this game that I just came up with called Race the Cars. And so all the kids in the group, they grabbed these race cars, and we got behind this line on the count of 3 or the count of 7 or whatever arbitrary number. I was like, I'll help them count, so we'll use different numbers, and we'll all count together, because I'm a teacher, right? And on whatever number we choose, I would count and I would yell at the top of the line, race the cars! And we'd roll the cars across the tile floor as hard as we could toward the other kids who didn't want to play. I guess I didn't really think that through very much. But I thought it was a thrilling game. I thought it was really, really fun. But I guess between that and the excessive wrestling, it was really no surprise to me that by the next week, the other supervisor teacher pulled me aside and introduced me to something called an inside voice. I had never heard of it, or at least I wasn't familiar with it at this point in my life anymore. And she said, we just kind of have to rein in the playtime. And I was like, well, I was having fun, but okay, so I repressed it. You see, I like having fun with kids because it's a no-holds-bar experience. It's high energy. They don't think about what they're doing. They just go, and they just have fun. They live in the moment. They're like, yeah, this is great. In fact, when you're wrestling with kids, about 20% of it is you having fun in wrestling. The other 80% of it is keeping them, and if any of you have wrestled with kids, you know this, the other 80% is kind of keeping them from running into walls, and when you got 8 or 9 of them on you, most of your energy just goes to keeping them alive and not breaking things. Because many kids don't think when they're playing. In fact, many kids don't think, at least critically, about a lot of the stuff they do. They just do it with all their heart. And after learning to control myself and gaining some semblance of an inside voice, I was able to balance my playtime in a way that allowed us to retain order. And I noticed when it came to song time, the same no-holds-bar, high energy, do it with all your heart passion was the way that most of the kids approached the music as well. And we sang the song, my God is so big, so strong, and so mighty, there's nothing my God cannot do. By the way, I'm not a singer. My God is so big, so strong, and so mighty, there's nothing my God cannot do. He made the trees, He made the seas, He made the elephants too. My God is so big, so strong, and so mighty, there's nothing my God cannot do. See, playing and learning and singing with these kids made it much more obvious to me why Jesus said in Matthew 19:14, let the little children come to me and do not hinder them, for such belong the kingdom of heaven. I learned a lot of things from my experience with these kids. I learned it's a difficult thing to discipline other people's children and gain their respect when you only are with them 2 hours a week. I learned that kids of the same age can develop at vastly different rates, and there's no one-size-fits-all way to dealing with them. And it's not as though I didn't know these things before. I mean, like I said, I have 9 nieces and nephews, but I learned it in a much more practical level. I learned when kids don't want to do something, they typically don't do it. And then when you make them do it, they make sure you know they don't want to do it. Go pick up that car. No! You need to pick up the car. Pick up the car. I'll show you pick up the car. You know, they got an attitude about it, right? And the same place is also where I learned this song. It may have existed in my childhood, but let's be frank, I'm 28. That was a long time ago. And everything back then for me is a little fuzzy. My God is so big, so strong and so mighty, there's nothing my God cannot do. Learning this song from a high energy, high emotional, no holds barred, do it with all your heart 3-year-old gave me a little perspective into how we are called to see God. So I have this question for you today. Have you ever stopped to think about God? As an adult, it's probably a silly question. In fact, many people in here, higher level Ozark students, might even be a little offended by it, but I want to ask the question, have you ever stopped to think about God? Putting aside your theories of theological proper, your understandings of atonement, reconciliation, propitiation. Can you tell I'm in Romans class this semester? Putting aside all of those thoughts, and for a moment, ignoring the technicalities of the creation narrative, whether it's figurative or literal, and putting aside historical context, and in the moment just thought about God. Have you ever, in the still of a silent summer night, stared at the night sky, and with the distractions of life and the noise of the dorm rooms far off in the distance, sat quietly and pondered the nature of God? In the purest of ways, in a way perhaps David did, lying on his back in a field, watching the stars shimmer and glow in the distance, and in that moment, thought about God. I hope you have. Now you're going to come back. You're going to put your theologian's hat back on. You'll step back into the world of historical grammatical context, the historical grammatical method, and cultural context and all of that. But for those brief moments, you can stare at the heavens and with an unadulterated innocence of a 3-year-old child, contemplate the mysteries of God's creation. He made the trees. He made the seas. Our God is so big, so strong, and so mighty. Some people in here may have grown up in a bigger city. In the big city, you have the tall buildings and the lights, and you're surrounded by everything, and it's possible in those situations to forget that the stars even exist. It's possible in those situations, surrounded by what man has accomplished, to even come to a close state of being ignorant of the nature of what God has made. It's possible. Now, you will likely walk away from this field no more intellectually informed, with no more technical knowledge as to the nature of God, and yet we can't help but feel that our minds have been opened to something that previously was unknown to us. And all you can do in those moments is worship God. Lord, O Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. There's a temptation when we come to a text like Psalm 8, which is our text today, to immediately put on our theological hats and jump into prophetic mode. We see this text quoted in places like Hebrews 2:5 or 1 Corinthians 15:27 as referring to Jesus, and it certainly does. There's an interesting dynamic when you're looking at the NIV compared to the ESV. When you come to verse 4 and beyond, the NIV is going to translate that, what is man that you are mindful of him? Human beings that you care for him. The ESV is going to interpret that, what is man that you are mindful of him? The Son of Man that you care for him. There's clearly a difference. The NIV takes a much more universal human mode, and the ESV takes a more prophetic Jesus interpretation. They're both fine in my mind. So I'm not going to argue that this text applies in its purest form to Jesus, but I am inclined to agree with Warren Wiersbe, who says, as David was writing it, there is a possibility he was recalling the days of his youth, lying on his back in a field and staring up at the heavens. Yes, this psalm in its most pure sense is fully actualized in Jesus. But I believe this text was written to apply to us as well. I do. And so I have to ask the question, have you ever stopped to think about God? Growing up as a child, my dad and my sister and I would go to Minnesota nearly every year for a long stretch of time. And we would usually take either one of her friends or one of my friends or one of our nephews or something like that. We would take one of those with us. And I remember one particular year, my best friend and I were up, and we decided to get up before the butt crack of dawn and go out fishing. And the weather, it's really nice in Minnesota, probably 60 degrees, and we backed the boat into the water, and it was just silent. It was still. It was quiet. When we started up the engine, you were scared you were waking up everybody within a 20-mile radius because it just travels across the water, and it's so loud. And we traveled to this little cove where we were going to go fishing, and we stopped the engine, and the boat comes to a complete standstill. No wind, no waves. And we're casting our lures out, and you can hear the plop, and the ripples expand to seem to what be forever. And as the morning progressed, you began to see the sun rise over the pines and cast its light over the lake as the fog began to move up. In the distance, you could hear the loons begin to sing, and you can think, even if I don't praise God, nature will. And in those moments, all you can do is consider the works that God has done. Nature cries out to the glory of God, and with the coming of night, the reminder of God's consistency abound. The same set that crested over the pines in the east move and begin to set in the west, and they reveal the stars in the heaven in the endless expanse. The massive power of God is being revealed in the twinkling of the lights of countless stars and the even greater void that fills in the space between them. God is big. God is big. And yet, we acknowledge that in the place of the lights and the vastness, God still has a mind to know me. O Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. When I look at your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon, the stars, which you have set in place. What is man that you are mindful of him? Son of man, that you care for him? Have you ever stopped to think about God? I don't go to Minnesota as often as I used to. I work, I have school. My sister's grown up, she's got her thing going on. But I did get to go last year. And we got a little cabin because my sister and her husband, my brother-in-law, brought their 1-year-old child. And 1-year-old children don't do quite as well as in tents. So we took turns watching her in the cabin so the other 3 could go out on the lake, so others could be out fishing. And for some reason, they let me watch her so the others could go out. I'm happy to report that I still have a niece, to my surprise as well. She stayed in the cabin because she can't be out long in the sun. It was cold this year. She couldn't be out in the cold. And even that, she has this little pushy mower thingy. I don't know, maybe you're familiar with those toys. You push them along and they got the little balls that bounce inside of them. But she wasn't old enough to learn how to turn it yet. And so she would scream happily along her way and go, yay! She'd hit a wall and start crying. And she would cry, and she would cry, and she would cry. until one of us walked up and turned her, and then she'd scream, "Ah!" until she hit a wall, and then she'd start crying again. And this would go on for, as long as she wanted to, really. And I can think of another time. The three of us, my sister and Tim, and myself were on the dock fishing, just kind of shooting the breeze. And there, I discovered that really only one of us could fish at a time. The other two were keeping track of the 1-year-old, Abigail, so she didn't just walk into the lake and drown. That would be bad news bears. And so only one of us could fish. And when I think about it, the simple truth of the matter is that little girl was hapless. She was weak. She was in constant need of supervision, and yet, even in the frailty of her youth, even in her vulnerability and ignorance, even there, God's power is displayed. The very fact that she exists, a beautiful little girl, God's power is displayed. He understands her pure call of worship. Her admittance and dependence on her parents, a reminder of our need for God. And the love of her parents, a reminder of God's provision for us. You see, that little girl, or any child for that matter, is made in the image of God. She can shut the mouth of doubters. In Matthew chapter 21, verse 12, Jesus is on the rampage in the temple, throwing over tables and driving out the money changers. And the Pharisees are overhearing the children saying, "Hosanna to the Son of David." And they're like, "Do you hear what they're saying? Do you hear them?" And Jesus is like, "Oh yeah, I hear them. Don't you know that out of the mouths of infants and nursing babies, you have prepared praise?" So, "Oh yeah, I hear him." You see, when God is present, the children praise him. Oh boy, let me tell you. Abigail loves VeggieTales. And on the way down, we got to listen to VeggieTales CDs, or way up to Minnesota, got to listen to VeggieTales CDs pretty much the whole way, and listen to her try to sing. And I can tell you, she'll be singing her verbal praises to God before we know it. And I can't wait. I can't wait. We say, "Lord, O Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth." Out of the mouths of babies and infants you have established strength because of your foes. You still the enemy and the avengers. Thinking of that little girl, I have this question. Have you ever stopped to think about God? It gets cold in Nebraska. It's where I'm from, God's country. Get cold. I guess it really comes with the territory. It's part of the game. Sitting in a ditch in sub-zero temperatures with the condensation from your mouth breathing on your face mask as it escapes. It'd be hard to imagine this is something that people would do by choice, but yet we do. And there I am. Why? Because it's quiet. In the solitude, knowing that my dad's about a mile away in his car, and beyond that, there's no one within 10, 20, 30 miles, I can consider how small I am. You see, in that field, on that patch of land, in Johnson County, in Nebraska, in the United States of America, in the world, in our solar system, in the Milky Way, in the universe, there I am, sitting alone, waiting for a deer. And the God responsible for speaking all of that into existence not only knows what I'm doing, but He cares. What is man that you are mindful of him? The Son of Man, human beings, that you care for him. In that moment, a deer approaches, and I aim my rifle, and I pull the trigger, and I think to myself, wow, what great power God has given us over creation. It's no small matter to give someone dominion over something that you have created. There's a couple parents in here. When you're looking for babysitters and you're terrified, that first time especially, oh, I'm going to leave, and this person has to watch over my kid, and it may be only for a couple hours, and that first time you're like, oh my gosh, is that kid going to be alive when I get back? I mean, I suppose it's not the same for everybody, but many of the parents I know, that's exactly how it is. It's a lot. That's only for a couple hours. And yet, God has given us the responsibility over this place. All of His creation in this world, God has given us dominion. In Genesis 2:15, God gave man charge over creation, and Genesis 9:2 affirms that. It says, "The fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth and upon every bird of the heavens, upon everything that creeps on the ground, all the fish of the sea. Into your hands they are delivered. Every moving thing that lives shall be food for you." By the way, I love this verse because this is where we're given permission to eat meat. Little side note, thank God for the flood. Thank God for steak. But the truth of the matter is, God desires to be in partnership with us. He desires to allow us to help Him in creation. I tried to find where this example came from, and I couldn't find it using Google. Maybe I should have used Bing instead. But I've heard it said that a garden is the ultimate manifestation of man's partnership with God. You see, a city, you're surrounded by what man is capable of doing. You have skyscrapers, you have electricity, you have streets paved, you have cars, you have technology. Everything in that city screams to the authority and the power of man. And the exact opposite is true of nature, where man is absent. In nature, all you have, not all you have, but what you have is God's unadulterated creation, which is beautiful in its own right. But what you have in a garden is a combination of the two. A man can build a garden. A man can till the ground. A man can plant the seed. A man can water it. But God provides the sun. God makes it grow. God paints the petals of the flower. A garden is the ultimate manifestation of God's desire to work with us in creation. And God gives us the ability to create, to destroy, preserve, and conserve, and restore. All of this has been given freely to us. Now, I want to be careful and state here it's true. Man has failed in their stewardship of creation. As children of Adam, we have been unable to take care of this planet that was given to us. And it's important to acknowledge that. And as I said before, it is Jesus who perfectly fulfills the text of Psalm 8. Jesus who can calm the sea, who calls fish into nets. Jesus perfectly fulfills this call. But even still, God gives us, limited as it may be, a power over creation. It says, "You have given Him dominion over the works of your hands. You have put all things under His feet, all sheep and oxen, and also the beasts of the field, the birds of the heavens and the fish of the sea, whatever passes along the paths of the sea. O Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth." And thinking about that, I have this question for you. You might guess what it is. Have you ever stopped to think about God? The place that I worked, there's a man named Tim. He used to hang out. He's a homeless guy. He used to hang out a lot around our store. And Tim, like many people in his situation, was heavily dependent on alcohol. A 175, which is a 1.75 liter of vodka, every day. Kept a very long, scruffy, usually dirty beard, and he was one of the friendliest men I knew. I spent many times after work sitting in conversation with Tim and just talking to him, and I don't know his story. He was never willing to share much of it, but the rumors were out there. The thing about Tim is he had this habit of disappearing for long periods of time. He would go to Oklahoma, or he would go to Neosho or Kansas. He had friends in all of these places, and he would hitchhike, and he would go there and hang out with them, but he always came back. Well, this past year, Tim disappeared for a very long period of time. I went months and months without seeing him, much longer than normal. There I was, working on Christmas Day, a double, mind you, an 18-hour shift, because I figured if I can't have my family, I might as well make, time and a half, right? But needless to say, despite the fact I chose to do it, I wasn't happy about it. I was a little depressed. I missed my family. In comes Tim. Something was a little bit different about him this time. His beard was a little shorter. It was clean. His eyes weren't bloodshot, and he spoke clearly. You see, I came to learn on this Christmas Day in which I was depressed and cursing the world that Tim was 6 months sober. He's staying at Water Gardens right now. He's in the process of doing the paperwork that will allow him to get back into the workforce and find an apartment. Merry Christmas to me, right? You want to talk about putting things in perspective? I was pretty happy after that. It's certainly one way to brighten my day. Now, we're still working on the Jesus thing. But I got his number. I called him recently, had him over, and him, my roommate, and I, we just sat around and we ate some big fat steaks and we just enjoyed life together and talked. You see, Tim was a man who had accepted his fate, but somewhere, somehow, some people began to open his eyes to the grace of God. And I don't know if I played a role in that or not, and quite frankly, I don't care. All I know is this month, a few Mondays from now, him and I are going to go fishing. We're going to sit out there, we're going to enjoy each other's company, and we're going to enjoy God's creation. And if I have anything to say about it, it certainly won't be the last time. And we can pray about the Jesus thing, and it will come up in conversation because it usually does. But the truth of the matter is, the story of redemption is being written in this man's life. The story of reconciliation is being played out in him. And I can put down my commentaries, my lexicons, and my dictionaries, and I can look up to the God of heaven, and I can say, God is big, and God is strong. And there is nothing that my God cannot do. Thinking about Tim, thinking about people in your life who the story of redemption and reconciliation is being played out or has been played out, can you sit in those moments and think about God? Indeed, as important as our books and our theology and our context and our cultural studies are in keeping us from heresy, from keeping us from seeing the angel of Moroni in a field somewhere, theology is important. It is. Please don't misunderstand me here. But we must ask ourselves, is that all there is to it? Are you still the wide-eyed, no-hold-bars, excited person who looks at what God is doing and says, wow, God, you are big. I want to be part of that. Or have you, in the grind of doctrine and theology and hermeneutics, lost sight of it? Do you believe that God is moving today? Not only on this campus, but in the world around us. Do you believe it? Because I do. And I have to ask the question, have you recently thought about God? Have you escaped the world we're forced to live in, and in the silence of a summer night, stared at the vast expanse above your head and truly thought about God? Have you seen the sun crest over the pines in the east, reflecting on the glassy water below as it travels to the west, revealing everything that God has created, and in that moment thought about God? Have you ever held a baby girl and felt her chest move up and down as she breathes, and listened to her speak in incomprehensible language that only God knows, knowing that we don't understand, but God hears her praise and worship, and in that moment, thought about God? Have you sat in the stillness of a frigid winter morning with the moisture from your breath freezing on your face mask as it leaves your mouth, waiting for a deer to walk by, and in that moment, knowing the power that God has given us over the earth, in that moment, thought about God? Have you seen the story of redemption play out in someone's life as they go down into the waters and come up from the baptistry, a new creation? And in that moment, thought about God? I have. And let me tell you what I have learned. Commentaries are cool. But God is big. And we are small. But small as we are in the scale of this universe, we are special. Special enough for Jesus to come and die for us. And there is nothing that my God cannot do. O Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. You have set the glory above the heavens. Out of the mouth of babies and infants you have established the strength because of your foes, to still the enemy and the avenger. When I look at your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have set in place, what is man that you are mindful of him? The Son of Man, that you care for him. You have made him a little lower than the heavenly beings and crowned him with glory and honor. You have given him dominion over the works of your hands. You have put all things under his feet, all sheep and oxen, and also the beasts of the field, the birds of the heavens, and the fish of the sea, whatever passes along the paths of the sea. O Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. My God is so big, so strong and so mighty. There's nothing my God cannot do. He made the trees, he made the seas, he made the elephants too. Indeed, my God is big, so strong and so mighty. There's nothing that our God cannot do.